Howdy, howdy. We are live another Friday night, kicking off a holiday weekend here in the United States. But yeah, we're going to be talking about some Star Trek. Got more Deep Space Nine goodness to share with everyone. So, Dave, it's going to be a packed show. We have 9 episodes of
I'm su-
DS9.
I'm super hyped. My screen looks weird. I don't see me.
Oh, well,
Is
you look fine to us.
Oh, okay. That's fine. As long as y'all can see me, it's all good. It's just some weird digital glitch or something like that. I'll jump to another tab and maybe it'll fix. But we'll get O'Brien on it. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, everything falls apart when he's not around. But yeah, it is a packed show, so we're going to go ahead and get things started. I see a couple folks in the live audience, so happy to have you here. I'm Fathery,
This is Dave.
and this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 225th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we take a deep look at Star Trek old and new. And tonight we're talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 6, specifically episodes 10 through 18 from Season 6. So that's everything from the Magnificent Ferengi to Inquisition. So we're starting with what I consider as a Ferengi episode apologist, the best Ferengi episode, and then we're ending with the original, very first ever Section 31 story. So it's a bit of depth, a bit of wide range of Deep Space Nine will be covered tonight.
And along the way, we're hitting at least one episode that was one of those I knew just from its title. Um, was it? Now I suddenly can't say it. The Beyond the Stars thing.
Far Beyond. Yeah, I always get it mixed up with the animated series episode. There's Far Beyond the Stars, and then there's Beyond the Farthest Stars. Like it's too
Yes.
similar. It throws me off.
And then
But
there's the old schlocky sci-fi movie Battle Beyond the Stars.
yeah. So
Anyway,
lot of
but
stuff
yeah,
going on beyond
it's
them
a big
stars.
one. It's a big one.
But yeah, we're gonna run through these 9 episodes though, so pretty quickly. But I'm very eager to talk about these with Dave because those that have been following our Deep Space Nine series, you know that the way that we do these, I've watched these episodes countless times. I've watched most of these when they originally broadcasted in the 90s, and several an unhealthily large amount of time since then. Dave has seen all of these through fresh eyes. He's just watched these episodes within the last few days, and we're gonna have two very different perspectives. That always keeps it pretty fun and interesting. I never know what he's gonna say, so it's always a blast for me just to hear his opinions on some
We
of the
have
stuff.
not talked about these.
And for me, some of the stuff, these are thoughts I've held within my mind for like
Oh,
25 years that are just
right
now
on.
being released into the ether. So,
Yeah, you'll get to the deep cuts.
just real quick, got to do a little bit of housekeeping. Want to give a big thank you and shout out to our patrons. And that's going to be Starfleet Boy, Kick is Eternal, Gay Clevin Lundstrom, Crazy Dutchy, Joanne Robertson, Quarkspar, John Dawes, Sci-Fi Haven, Geek Filter, and our anonymous supporters. Thank each and every one of you so very much. And to celebrate with our patrons, we're going to be hosting our monthly Patreon watch party. We do that in the Tex-Trek Discord server. We do one a month. If you're listening to this later, you probably missed this one. We're doing it tomorrow from day of recording, January 14th. We're talking about the episode Ship in a Bottle. That's the second Moriarty episode of TNG. And we're kind of counting down to seeing some of these characters again in Star Trek Picard Season 3. We got another one planned for February that we'll announce soon. That's another TNG episode, especially if you're a fan of Dr. Beverly Crusher. It's definitely going to be an episode you'll want to tune in for, I think. But yeah, we'll talk more about that in the future. But, you know, our Discord has various tiers with different perks, but you can come in as little as $2 a month. It goes a long way to help us out, covers a lot of the expenses we have to keep the show going, podcast hosting, website hosting, StreamYard subscription, that type of stuff. So we appreciate it when people can chip in and help that way. And if you don't want to do Patreon, if you don't want to commit to a monthly contribution, you know, I know that sometimes for me it's just easier to give, you know, one-time gifts here and there for stuff like this. We also have the super chat feature. I always forget to bring it up, but on YouTube, if you're watching us live, you can super chat. You get a highlighted comment. Well, if you do super chat, we'll stop what we're talking about and read your comment. So it's a great way to be part of the conversation. I never bring that up. I need to start mentioning that every show. So maybe Dave will help me remember.
Yeah, we'll get on it. Super chat.
Yeah, and you know, if you can't help monetarily, you can always rate the podcast wherever you get podcasts. You can subscribe if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel. We're trying to get to 1701 subscribers, so maybe we can hit that goal. I have to learn a new song for that, I guess. But
you have to sing like a new Uhura song, or we got to find something in there. Maybe a Data show tune.
But yeah, there's tons of way to support and help out. You can always, you know, like the videos, subscribe, get your friends to subscribe, rate the podcast. We appreciate all of it. So Dave, are you ready to start off our discussion? By the way, I should also say that we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of DS9. I forgot to mention that last week when we, you know, just hit the actual anniversary date of DS9's original premiere. But, you know, we're doing all of this and just coincidentally timed out to be the month that Deep Space Nine turned 30, which is weird to me that Deep Space Nine is as old now as the original series was when they crossed over in 96.
That's pretty wild. I don't like to think about those anniversaries too much.
Well,
But by the way, Father, as a little preface to this, I would also like to say, of course, we got our awesome audience out here in the chat rooms and stuff like that, and I always enjoy the spontaneity of engaging with anything they throw out there. So let us know your thoughts on these episodes as we're hitting them, and we'll occasionally highlight them or might throw them into the discussion. So shall we jump into Magnificent Ferengi?
Sure. So starting off, Season 6, Episode 10, The Magnificent Ferengi, written by Ira Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler, directed by Chip Chalmers, I'm not sure how you say it. When Quark's mother Ishka is captured by the Dominion, Quark, Rom, and Nog lead a team of Ferengi into a meeting on Empok Nor with Kevin as their payment. Kevin, of course, being our lovely Vorta, so lovable. Everyone likes him. It's just like everybody loves Kevin, you know. So forget Raymond. Everyone loves Kevin. He was in Rocks and Shoals way back at the beginning of Season 6.
And which we discussed last week.
Yes.
And I was saying, oh, this guy is such a bastard. But I guess, and you know, he kind of got his win in the end. How terrible that is. I guess we'll never see him again. And you were like, we'll talk about that. And then, there was discussions in the audience of or like it came up briefly. But yes. Well, I'm gonna hold off for just a second, but yes, Kevin is back for this one. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. He gets the most righteous payback I could imagine in this one. It was actually far worse than anything I could have dreamt up.
Yeah, I remember that when you saw it, you immediately, I assume it was, I don't know, it might have been like 4 days later, but you did message me and you were like, oh my God, you know, Kevin got his just desserts, you know, it's even worse than what I thought he deserved, and I hated that bastard, or whatever you said. Yeah,
well, somehow I pictured if it was going to go down, that he would, you know, get, you know, cut down by Worf with a botleth, or he'd be in a ship that got blown up in something, you know. I didn't imagine it would be a humiliating Weekend at Bernie's death.
Yes. Yeah, very, very disgraceful, which, you know, I doubt any of these goofy-ass Ferengi understood exactly what went down on that planet where he sent all of his men to the slaughter, but they really avenged Phil Morris and his Jem'Hadar brothers in that episode.
This episode got off on a good foot with me because although I am not a big Ferengi fan, I do like a kind of heisty thing, and I like that kind of recruitment mode where you see almost like not if not a montage, a series of quick edits of the recruitment, and that had that with mostly familiar faces.
Yeah. And originally, this episode, obviously, Magnificent Ferengi, it is based on the Magnificent Seven, which was based on the Akira Kurosawa movie, The Seven Samurai. Although at the time, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, both of which do have the classic recruiting sequences in it.
Yeah, and it's a story that's been told. Pixar did it with A Bug's Life, is basically the same story.
Yep. Anytime a small village or something is defended against vastly superior numbers. And this is, what they're actually doing in this is, it's honestly only the recruitment phase that closely resembles it.
I think Star Wars has done it 3 times in the other Star franchise.
Yeah, I can think of at least 2, so yeah. But they are also, by the way, they're very underdog in this. Ferengi are not warriors. They quickly realize this. And I don't know, you said the premise. They're supposed to do a prisoner swap, and they get Kevin to use in the balance, but they need to be ready for anything. And so Quark gets to pulling out everybody from the past, and one is the Hitman guy the Eliminator? Is that new?
Eliminator, Lek. Not to be confused with Zek. I'm getting a little similar there, but yeah, he had a blink and you miss it appearance in was it Family Business? Or that was the one where they start the Ishka Zek romance. He was supposed to be part of a larger scene that got cut, so it ended up he's just, like, barely on screen for a few seconds.
But like technically, you might say he was in that one first.
Yeah, he's considered the same character.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that they're trying to do a prisoner exchange, and that wasn't the original mission. Originally, they were just going to go in like a hit squad and rescue.
Oh right.
Moogie, but it was their Quark's idea to we need to win this the Ferengi way. We go in and make deals, we negotiate. And that's what I love about this episode is the cool thing that they do in Deep Space Nine in season 6 and 7, the war years, is they're telling war stories. And we see the war fought in various different ways. Sometimes with like little tiny runabouts flying around.
Sure.
There's some variety in the different different encounters with the Dominion during the war, but
not everybody's a capital ship or the Defiant,
right? And here we see the Ferengi engagement with the Dominion during the war, and Quark gets a victory on the Dominion. He beats the Dominion Ferengi style. He rips them off. He's like, oh, I'm gonna give you one prisoner for another prisoner. He ends up leaving with, okay, I got Ishka and I got a new Vorta for the Federation to interrogate.
Yep.
So he ripped them off. So it's a very much a Ferengi style victory.
Right, but they did still get a little shootout at the end that they got to take down some dudes on.
And it's also an hilarious episode. Like I think this is one of the funniest episodes of Star Trek of all time. The one of the biggest laugh out loud moments for me is when they're running the drills in the Hollow Suite, and Moogie gets shot.
That's great. Actually, before things even really got going, it's I can't even remember why they were in it, but like Rom and was it like Rom and Quark are going through a Jeffries tube and they accidentally go into like Sisko's room?
Right. Scene is so wonderfully executed because it doesn't beat you over the head with being too silly, too ridiculous. It felt like real and believable. It's like one of those like real life awkward moments. It's like Avery Brooks's reaction.
We must have taken a wrong turn. It looks that way.
I mean, in an episode we're going to talk about in a moment, we know how the weight of the war is weighing heavily on Sisko. He's in there probably looking at lists of names of dead officers. Oh, I knew this guy and all this and all that. And then he sees these 2 goofy ass Ferengi, pop out of this hole in the side of his office.
They just open a little hatch. Yeah, it's almost like the old Batman gag in the 60s Batman thing where they'd be climbing up the wall and some dude would just stick their head out the window.
Yeah. In the beginning of the episode, Quark's trying to tell like this heroic story. He's in his bar, he's in his domain, where, he should like reign as king, like everyone's like, oh, that was so cool, Quark, how you were like such a clever businessman. You figured out there was no drought and you got the syrup of squill, when it's hard to find right now. And then, the war heroes come in, the Starfleet officers, and, immediately everyone flocks to them. And Odo is like, yeah, like there's nothing heroic about earning profit. So, he kind of had a chip on his shoulder from the very first scene of like, needing to like prove himself and prove like, yeah, like you don't have to be out there fighting a war to be, heroic or be cool or be a badass.
It's one of those things that's like it's a contrivance of episodic TV that it's like, the very thing that he was fretting about, he gets a solution to in the episode, but that actually can make for extremely satisfying episodic TV. So,
we go back to Empok Nor, which was originally introduced in season 5 in the episode Empok Nor. So we'll see it again too after this. They're not done with this second station, which conveniently has the same sets as DS9, so it's easy to shoot on.
But it's lit darkly, and when we see an exterior view, it's tipped on its side, so we know it ain't no Deep Space Nine. It's freaky looking.
Yeah, it's scary, and I'm sure Nog specifically, or particularly, was a little freeze. Like, yeah, last time I came here, I was dealing with, crazy ass Garrick trying to murder me, so not the best of times. And yeah, they bring back Cousin Gala, who we saw was the weapons dealer, and then Brunt, who's trying to get back in favor with the Nagus. Originally, it was going to be the Nagus who was captured by the Dominion, but Wallace Shawn was busy, and so they changed it to. I actually think it works better as Ishka. If it's not I think it'd be weirder if it was like the head of state of the Ferengi Alliance is captured. I feel like it would be kind of a bigger deal to do like kind of like this under the table deal or whatever they're doing.
This gets to feel like it's a little bit more of a personal mission. And also it's like the scale is a little bit more appropriately small, given that it's a story about like a kind of a small win for the Ferengi.
And it's fun just seeing like all of the established Ferengi characters, like all the recurring Ferengi characters. But I guess the Grand Nagus isn't in the episode, but he's talked about. He's the guy who sent the message to Quark at the beginning. So
I think Brunt is maybe the last one we see. And as I was watching the episode, I was like, oh, they're not going to have that piece of shit Brunt on. And then sure enough, there he was.
Who it's really cool now too, because Jeffrey Combs has become such a big part of the show as Weyoun. That like even though like Weyoun's not in this episode, but Jeffrey Combs is still in it because he's playing Brunt. There's actually an episode we're gonna get to eventually, Dave, that it gets memed a lot, but in the opening of the episode, when it has like the credits appearing on the screen when the episode first starts going after the title sequence, they list in there guest starring Jeffrey Combs as Weyoun and Brunt. They're not in the same room, but they just happen to both be in the same episode.
Yeah,
it's
great.
Really cool. It's really cool to see that. So,
it's a small thing, but I liked that Kira released Kevin into the for the Ferengi to use to negotiate with as a thanks thing, essentially for Quark breaking her out, which in sort of the big picture is huge. I mean, that was like a massive thing for Quark to have done.
Yeah. He went in there, risked his life, shot down 2 Jem'Hadar guards. So and it's nice that now Kira has always been one of the people on the station who's probably, I guess, out of all the regular characters, I don't know, it's a close race between her and Worf, but like the least fond of Quark.
Right.
So it's cool to like see her like develop a respect for we kind of saw like Odo kind of develop a respect for him through their rivalry, and now like Kira's like there's some decency in this disgusting little troll of a man. So it's cool to see that recognized. We have to talk about like the big guest star though of Iggy Pop.
They perfectly cast, I think, as Avorta. Yelgren, is that how you say it?
Yes, yeah. He's very dry. It's good that they kind of like downplay it like that, because I don't know Iggy Pop's acting range, but I felt like they asked just enough from him that he kind of has like an intense presence naturally, and so they just asked for that. They weren't trying to get too outside of the box with him or anything. So I think it worked out well what they did.
My favorite exchange with he and Quark was when Quark says, Family, you understand. Not really. I was cloned.
Yeah. No parents, no sweetheart, no investment portfolio. I like him and Ishka just, when they're just like making small talk standing around and they're talking about like the cream she puts on her skin. So he's like, that's very interesting. However, I'm afraid I'm going to have to kill you soon if your son doesn't show up. Like, what the hell is this business? He's just like at work. Like, this is just what he does at work,
Yeah. And am I correct that like Iggy Pop was just like he was like a fan who kind of was like, hey, can I get in on this?
It's actually not so much he was a fan of Star Trek, but that Ira Stephen Bear was a fan of him.
Okay.
So much so that it's pretty common for showrunners, to not be like on the set all the time. They're busy, like writing and keeping the writers' room in charge and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've read that every day Iggy Pop was on set, Ira Stephen Bear was there on set. So it was like, I get to hang out with like, my favorite rock star by casting him on my show.
Yeah, that's great. What a weirdo. Not him, but Iggy Pop.
We're going to talk about it later, but the Alamo becomes kind of a recurring thing in Deep Space Nine, which is cool. It's not that far away from where Dave and I live. We're in Austin.
Yeah.
This is down I-35 in San Antonio.
But Texas shout out.
The I guess like kind of like the first mention, like this Alamo theme starts in this episode. Quark mentions the Battle of Prexnax, where 10 Ferengi went down fighting. So there's stuff like that like pops up a lot, like the Spartans at Thermopylae, that type of stuff.
I hadn't noticed that. That's pretty cool.
Becomes a bit of a theme. So it kind of
given that they are, it essentially DS9 is of course a fort. It certainly is fit.
Yeah, even like kind of how it got conquered by the Dominion, went back and forth. That was the significance of the Alamo is that it went back. The Texan army under Ben Milam captured it, and then Travis lost it to when Santa Ana came. It's probably more like historical stuff than anyone cares about, but but switching back to Star Trek, the other real funny moment for me in this episode is just Nog after Yelgren, not Yelgren, but Keevan is accidentally shot, and they're like standing around talking.
They were
oh my
trying
God, what
to
are we
shoot,
gonna do
by
now?
the way, Quark. They were trying to shoot Quark for like
ripping them off,
and then he gets shot, and gets to do the "I hate Ferengi" death line.
The perfect line. That was a perfect way for him to die. But then when Nog is like, well, there's no doubt about it, this man is dead. It almost felt like he had like watched the original series and was gonna try to do like a Dr. McCoy he's dead Jim, but everyone's just like, yeah, like no shit, like he's dead, like.
But then his body conveniently twitches.
Yeah, I think Nog does watch the original series, or at least like he's read like the log entries, because he knew like the Spock's brain thing, like we're gonna weekend at Bernie's him, and
yep.
When they do like the corridor where Ishka, she's not in on the plan, of course, when she is walking towards Quark, and then Keevan zombie robot whatever is walking the opposite direction, and they almost like bump into each other. It felt like so weird and awkward.
Oh man, yeah. I loved how ridiculous it got, because at that point, once I saw the little spark go off in their eyes that they were gonna weekend at Bernie's him, I was ready for all the ridiculous ending stuff.
Yeah, it was a wonderfully stupid idea.
Yes.
It was the perfect idea for like this goofy episode like this,
and also because it was Keevan, I think, because it was such an awful person. It's like a war criminal, basically.
Yeah,
he got weekend at Bernie's. So this I don't know where this is in my overall pantheon of Ferengi episodes, but I feel like it'd have to be one or two. Like it's maybe Little Green Men could be higher.
That's another damn good one too.
Yeah.
We're not quite done with the Ferengi centric episodes. We're starting to get close to the end of the show, but there's still some more in there, so not done yet. I should say that I said this is my favorite Ferengi episode, and I'm someone who actually likes Ferengi episodes. I know like they've gotten a lot of hate over the years. This batch of 9 episodes that we're talking about, there's an episode in here, we haven't gotten to it yet, but we're going to get to one that like I really, really dislike. In fact, if I could delete an episode of DS9, if I had to pick one to get rid of, it would be one we're going to talk about tonight. That being said, this collection of episodes, this is probably going to be my favorite grouping of Star Trek episodes we ever talk about on the show, at least so far. I can't imagine ever like selecting like another handful of episodes like this, and just there's so much in there that I love so much. The Magnificent Ferengi is a big part of it, but also like these next few are ones that I've always cherished and really mean a lot to me. And I think if I don't like listing things. I guess I'm the only person on the internet who like doesn't really like to make like top 5 list or whatever. But if I had to do that, this episode I think is worthy of being in my top 5, and I'm going to say that for at least 3 more episodes we're talking about tonight. So
yeah, that's pretty wild.
yeah, some of the stuff is the big reason why I consider like Deep Space Nine season 6 my favorite season of all of Star Trek. But if we don't have anything else on the Ferengi, we can switch over something very, very different and talk about Gul Dukat and his evil mind being explored in the episode Waltz.
Yeah, let's do it. You know what? I want to just preface this by saying I felt like Gul Dukat seems like a character that they never, although I know that there were times they behind the scenes that they changed plans with him, but I feel like he has an incredibly strong continuity of character, and everything that we ultimately find out about him seems to be supported by what we saw as far back as like season 1. He feels like that same guy, and it feels like we just got deeper and deeper and peeled away more and more layers of the onion.
Yeah.
So let's get to the heart of it.
Sure. So this is season 6, episode 11, Waltz, written by Ronald D. Moore, directed by Odo, Rene Auberjonois. Following the destruction of the starship Honshu, Sisko is severely injured and trapped alone on a deserted planet with Dukat, who becomes increasingly unstable. Yeah, he's on his way to, I guess, they're having a tribunal or something to decide, what they're going to do with him before they actually put him on trial for potential war crimes.
Right.
The ship is shot down, and him and Sisko escape. Rene Auberjonois as a director, they give him a lot of like the goofy episodes. He's directed a bunch of the Ferengi episodes we were just talking about. He directed the Ryza episode, that He Who Is Without Sin. So this is radically different from the other work he's done, where this is
right.
This is as least comical as you can get.
Right. One of the most serious episodes, and arguably, I pretty much I feel like I've come around to Dukat as Trek's greatest villain, unless I give it to Khan. It's hard to compare because one is a long-term villain, one isn't really. But this is the episode.
They're both technically recurring characters.
Right, but one recurs a whole lot more. But this is the episode that gets to the heart of Dukat more than anything else, maybe. And so, yeah, as opposite a comedic episode as you could get.
There is one funny thing in the episode, and that's when they're talking about like his therapist, Dr. Cox, who I never watched the TV show Scrubs, but I guess I know enough people who watched Scrubs. Like, I hear people tell me about Dr. Cox all the time. Sounds like a funny dude, I guess. I never watched the show, but...
Yeah, I believe he always had the cutting remark.
Oh, and also I guess Dukat has that little joke when Sisko's like, "Can I get you anything?" But he says, "How about a bottle of Kanar and an Orion slave girl?" But
I liked how awkward that was, because actually that whole conversation, because there seemed to be some genuine empathy on the part of Sisko, but also this is just you're now a formal prisoner, and you're just going to be. We're going through the motions of getting you to whatever your final judgment is. And there's kind of no purpose in being like wound up and angry. So some of it is just the formality of like this trial structure.
And in his log entry at the beginning, he says, part of me wishes that he had died in the battle when we retook the station. And he feels guilty. He's like, that's a thought unbecoming of a Starfleet officer. And, in the beginning of the episode, in Sisko's heart, he does kind of wish Dukat was dead, but in his mind, his reasoning is like, look, this dude, he lost an empire, he lost a daughter, he lost his mind. Surely that's punishment enough, right? Everyone compares Hitler, Dukat and Hitler, and, I kind of feel like people probably make too many Hitler comparisons. That's like a whole thing, but, I think a lot of the stuff, it's probably pretty appropriate. It's like, what would be like a punishment enough for Hitler? Like, like losing
right.
your mind, losing your loved ones, like how much do you actually like deserve? And At the end of the episode, though, after he's spent like this time with Dukat in this cave, at the end of the episode, Cisco has like that conviction, that whole like, it's either me or him now. Like he's like,
Yeah. He's ready. He's ready to choke out the. If it was Batman, he'd be like, the Joker dies tonight.
yeah, it's like the darkness of Dukat is like so. It's like so evil that it even like darkens Cisco's soul.
Well, you know what? There was something I wrote down while I was watching those early scenes, and that it was that Cisco was treating him as an honored foe. That kind of romantic wartime notion of, well, you fought the good fight. I can respect respect you on some level. But it's like, if you actually get down to the underpinnings of what Dukat is, of the utter malignant narcissism, the xenophobia, and it all, which will begin to peel away, then there's nothing honorable about that at the end. Which, by the way, I thought they were gonna, at first, I was a little worried it was gonna be some variant of a Hell in the Pacific kind of story.
Oh, they were gonna like work together.
Yeah, I was like, please don't do that.
I mean, they're kind of forced to, under like the initial circumstances, but
right.
Yeah, I think it gets suspicious early on. Dukat's a little too nice. He's like cooking for him, and he's got like the comm set up on. He's like, he put like the cast on his arm and every. I don't know. For all we know, like when Cisco's unconscious, like I mean, I don't buy that story of like Lieutenant McConnell died on the way out or whatever. And like for all we know, Dukat like grabbed a phaser and was like shooting people on his way out of the Honshu and just dragging Cisco behind him. But
ultimately this kind of subverts the Hell in the Pacific idea.
Yeah.
Where it looks like it does at least play to that trope a little bit, and then subverts it.
There's this cool exploration of Dukat's motivations and stuff. In a book you could just write like what he's actually thinking or feeling in his heart. Film or television, you have to come up with a way to show it. So they have him arguing with these imaginary people that appear in the form of Wayoon and Damar and Kira. Kira's the like Nana visitors, just like being like just trolling him, like laughing at him and stuff, making goofy faces when he's trying to talk seriously.
Whenever they do stuff like that, or it's say the prophets are speaking through different characters, but and also in other shows when they do this, I always think it must be fun for these people to get to step outside their character. So they're like sometimes they appear as their character, but they're speaking in someone else's voice. It always seems fun.
And Dukat's obsession with Cisco, like he needs like this equal to like recognize him as like you like I get you, I understand you, your validation. What you said about everything feeling appropriate to what's come before, it's very much that same notion of like Dukat he just wants everyone to like recognize his greatness is really his only motivation.
We have seen sort of this. I feel like our current world and our last president, Trump, was so desperate for the approval, and it still is. He actually has an ego that is actually higher than I think Dukat's, but wanted the approval of strongman dictator types. It was like a recurring thing throughout his whole presidency, and so that this is a perfect take on that mentality, that psychological mechanism by which people who, in fact, it seems like are desperately kind of low on self-esteem, or have a desperate need to be fed compliments constantly, want to be recognized as great men. It's like the only thing that might feed them. And I love how that like early on Cisco can kind of he plays him a little bit, but then like it starts to, what is it, like Kira, the sort of ghostly Kira, is like he's just telling you what you want to hear.
And I think part of why he's so fixated on Cisco is Cisco basically stole like Dukat's narrative, right? Like Dukat like lost everything. He lost his position. He was demoted to being like the bus driver when he was taking Kira to that conference in that one episode way back in season 4. He ended up on like a bird of prey. Like he doesn't even have like his Cardassian ship. He's on like this enemy ship on a bird of prey. Fought his way back to being in charge. Went back to Deep Space Nine, reclaimed it. Took it from the usurper Cisco, and basically Sisko just turned around and did like the exact same thing. Sisko didn't have shit when his Jim Hadar ship got shot down and Rocks and Shoals that we were just talking about. And Sisko went all the way from there to leading the invasion to get Deep Space Nine back and reclaim that throne. And Sisko, of course, like wouldn't frame it that way, but Dukat, it was always about like sitting back on that throne above Bajor, having the Bajorans look up to him and everything. So I think that's part of why he has this rivalry and this connection with Sisko set up here, and Sisko is able to get Dukat to open up and show his true bigotry and ugliness, and he basically goes full the white man's burden, the Kipling book or poem.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a poem, but if you read it, it's like very cringe. It like
for sure.
It's as a white person, I would say it's embarrassing.
Yeah, like a soup on the deepest conceivable level. Like it's embarrassing, but like it's also that's actually like the sort of trite level. Like as a English manifesto, it's vile, right? like this was thought of, and this had like real consequences on people. This was like a English perspective of a colonizer perspective.
Yeah. But just Dukat's whole thing of like, the Bajorans should have accepted their place as the inferior race. It's just fate that made us so much better, and they should have recognized that. And I tried to be, a gracious ruler, and they all deserve to die now for not seeing my greatness and my how kind and benevolent of a awesome ruler I was. Just to hell with all of them. I'm just gonna go obliterate that entire species, just genocide all of them.
It's interesting because they have like added nuance to him throughout the season, throughout the seasons, all of them, and it's kind of neat because it's like their final trick was to reveal the final nuance, maybe, and I know his story isn't quite done yet, so is to reveal, oh no, he's a piece of shit. He's the worst.
Yeah, this episode, it is kind of transitional. This is taking like the Dukat that we've had prior to this, when he's the head of state of the Cardassian Union and serving the Dominion, and now we're kind of like moving Dukat to where he's gonna be the rest of the show. So we're kind of in an awkward little transitional period with Dukat. So just keep your eye on there's still some stuff going on there. I just want to quickly comment on the search to find Sisko and how they subverted the trope of like I didn't understand that transmission. Like Bashir
Right.
tries to do like that Star Trek thing of like, oh, what was that? I didn't quite copy. Looks like you're breaking up. Sorry, bye. And then Worf is just like, no, we all know what Kira's orders were. It would be dishonorable not to obey them. And when Bashir is like, you'll forgive me if I don't value your honor over the captain's life. I just love Worf's response, which for Worf, it's very like restrained, but he's just like, you may leave the bridge now, Doctor.
Yeah.
And I also love Dax backing him up. Dax is probably someone who might have been willing to bend the rules, but I think because as her Parmakai in the captain's chair, I think she was trying to, support him, and I love seeing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, it was on my mind that much as I love the captain, they said I think 30,000 lives were online in the escort mission that they needed to run.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was that many, but yeah, the troop transport. Lots and lots of people.
It was a big thing. So yeah, like not necessarily one where, like when Kira said not 1 second more, she meant it.
Well, let's switch gears to another funny episode. The tone is all over the place, but we're going to talk about Season 6, Episode 12, Who Mourns for Morn, written by Mark Jared O'Connell, directed by Victor Lobel. Morn dies, and he doesn't really, leaving his entire estate to Quark, but some of Morn's old acquaintances want a piece of the action. Ha ha ha, that's a real funny synopsis writer.
When I watched this though, I didn't know if he might die. I wasn't really aware of it. I was thinking maybe they're gonna bring him back, and then I was like, no, they're not. Yes, they are.
The idea was to kill him. That was the initial notion was, what if we did like Citizen Kane, and he dies at the very beginning, and then we learn all the stuff about him, like Charles Foster Kane in the movie Citizen Kane. It was a bad idea to kill him though. He's kind of like the mascot of the show. So he's
Yeah, I did look at some behind the scenes thing on this, and I saw that basically someone was like, "Don't do that. The fans are going to hate you," and they were like, "You're right."
The funny thing though is that the actor who plays Morn, Mark Allen Shepard, or I guess he's credited as an extra. Which funny story about that in just a moment. But when Quark has the memorial service in the bar, which I think is a combination of both like heartfelt but also opportunity because he is a Ferengi. When he grabs that Bajoran and he says, this was Morn's bar stool, we should keep it warm for Morn and make sure it's never empty. That guy, that Bajoran security dude that he grabs to sit in the chair, that is actually Mark Allen Shepard. That is Morn outside of the Morn costume prosthetic stuff.
I found that out after the fact. Certainly did not realize it as I was watching it, but that is a nice little touch, though. That is an ideal in joke, I would say.
Yeah, another cool story on that is that one of our audience members, I think it was Chuck, who replied to some tweets I was putting on Twitter, and he said that, I actually went to a convention in 1998 that Mark Allen Shepard was at, and he told me, I'm going to appear outside of the Morn makeup in next week's episode, so be on the lookout for it. And he noticed him as that Bajoran.
Oh, nice.
So I thought that was cool. I love hearing stories like that.
Yeah, that's great.
But, Quark's whole, adventure here, I think it's funny and fun and, kind of, it's another, kind of heist type thing. But, Dave, what did you think about it?
I liked the episode, and I think it was a little bit better than I expected it to be when I realized this is going to overall be a lighter episode. But I think after the Magnificent Ferengi so recently, it couldn't help but be kind of overshadowed. But if I were giving stars, I would give one extra star because it had the Ferengi shriek in it. I love any episode where a Ferengi shrieks like a child.
I think it's fun, seeing these different characters show up and pile it. It's just it keeps getting more and more complicated. There's a good, clear escalation throughout the episode.
Yeah,
it starts off. It's cool. Quark's gonna have 1,000 bricks of latinum, which is a lot of money. Let's say this is $1 billion. It starts off oh, I'm Morn's ex-wife. It's okay, well, I can give you 10% of it. I'm still gonna have the equivalent 800 million. That's still more money than anyone needs. And then those brothers, the scary brothers that try to intimidate them, and
I like that one. The lead talker of the brothers. He had a very creepy voice. He had a great creepy voice.
Yeah, he was really good. He had that good presence. He's like, oh, you like pleasant surprises? I think I'm pleasant. Hey, brother, you think I'm pleasant? He thinks I'm pleasant.
Jill posted in the comments to say she liked the voice on the guy. Just, I think, literally as I was saying it too. So that was clearly a good creepy dude.
And that Matador painting that had been seen previously. That was in I think that was the episode In the Cards.
Nice.
Directed by Michael Dorn. We got another Worf directed episode we're going to talk about tonight, I believe. But the reveal at the end, where Morn had swallowed all the latinum from the heist, they do a good job setting that up. This is the episode that introduced to the Star Trek mythos that latinum is actually liquid inside of the gold bar, gold pressed latinum. It's just a liquid inside of gold casing. But they mentioned that earlier, when he's talking to Jadzia about, counting change with an eyedropper or whatever. And they talk about Morn having a second stomach. That's why he ate so much he's such a good customer. He'd order so much food. And they talk about his hair falling out. So at the end, when all that stuff comes together, he's like, oh, you swallowed all that latinum in your second stomach. You've been holding it in your guts for years. That's what made your hair fall out. So they put all the clues there. It's obviously I think too ridiculous. I doubt anyone predicted that, but
right.
It was a cool reveal.
Arguably in the whodunit style, they kind of played fair. One of my favorite gags in this probably, I feel like this is something that would go back to maybe some old like gangster movie or something like that, is that everybody who breaks into Morn's place, or a lot of them, are making fun of they're you need to get a better lock because they just keep busting in.
Oh yeah.
And I also liked whoever it was who was sort of the impersonating an FBI guy from Morn's gang of thieves, which that is Kane, that is the big reveal, of course, is that he really did run a gang of thieves, or run with them. And but when Quark is trying to do the nod to the people,
Oh.
other people
Well, why do
listening
you
in the
keep
room.
craning your neck?
Yeah, and he just utterly blows it.
Yeah. I love it when like they set up the audience for like, oh, here comes that cliche that I know to expect from years of watching television. And then it's like, nope, not on this show. We're gonna undercut it. I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, the DS9 subversion, and it's cool to find out. Yeah, Morn was like such a gangster. He won the he pulled off the Lesepian Mother's Day heist, which was like this big famous bank heist and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
their Lufthansa heist
The
of the DS9 world.
the other thing about Mark Shepard that I wanted to mention was that Armin Shimmerman was pissed that he didn't get actor credit for. He's like, no, we're doing an entire episode based around the character this guy's been playing for years. Like, he should get credited and paid as an actor, not as an extra. But as Armin Shimmerman has said many times, I've heard him say before, Paramount is the biggest Ferengi. So
Oh. Yeah, that's a pretty harsh description, but Lord knows he has earned the right to say it.
But yeah, it is a lot of fun. It is, a little strangely similar to the Magnificent Ferengi to be aired only 2 weeks later. But I like it. Not quite as
And
much
it's
as
a
the
weird.
Magnificent Ferengi, but I like it a
It's
lot.
especially weird as bookends the two of them for Waltz.
Yes. But it's something that Strange New Worlds, I think, learned from DS9 is, after you do like, oh, look, we're going to do like Gorn killing people. Oh, now we need to do like a goofy body swap episode with Spock. And then the next week we can do another hard hitting episode with,
Yep.
child murder. So
As long as you have something of an element of episodic nature going on, even though they're clearly doing serial stuff in here too, but there's also a fair amount of episodic stuff still happening. You can pull that off. Yeah, it is not like it might be a little bit of a swerve, but I don't know. It's like it's like when you're listening to a playlist and you hear some pretty disparate music, but you're like, oh, but this is still good song. So
well, we're gonna have to change the tone again and talk about some 1950s racism in season 6, episode 13, "Far Beyond the Stars." Teleplay by Ira Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler. Story by Mark Scott Zickrey, and directed by Avery Brooks. Who, before I read the synopsis, let me just say what an incredible job of Avery Brooks to play the two main characters. He's both Benny Russell and Ben Sisko. He's in almost every scene of this entire episode. Hell, he might be in every scene now that I think about it. And he was also directing this, so that was a hell of an effort on his part.
it's the equivalent, I suppose, of like a one-man show kind of thing for for at least this episode. It's a pretty stunning achievement. I don't know if there was recognition at the time in any way, but it'd be nice if that had been recognized as like almost like a special award or something.
The synopsis on this one: experiencing a vision from the prophet, Sisko sees himself as Benny Russell, a science fiction writer in the 1950s who struggles with civil rights and inequality when he writes the story of Captain Benjamin Sisko, a black commander on a futuristic space station. So, Dave, you said you had heard about this episode before you watched it. What did you think now that you've finally seen it?
This is an episode that like very early on, I think part of it was that sort of honestly, I thought the jazz music in it was great. And
real quick, I don't mean to interrupt you,
Nope.
but I just got a
Go ahead.
comment. Avery Brooks was so dedicated to this episode that he like sat in through like all of the music selection and like the editing and picking. He's a very musical dude in real life. He plays the piano and stuff. Go watch the Captain's documentary. He's really weird hanging out with William Shatner.
Right, I have seen clips of that.
He was involved with all of the music that went into it too. So
Oh, that's very cool because sometimes that is what sort of like I tend to pay a fair amount of attention to music, and and I've seen jazz pastiches in Star Trek before. Anytime that Picard is doing one of his holodecks things, or just any number of other places. And it's usually not. I mean, like it's fine. It's there's sometimes it's even good, but like this one, I was like, oh, I feel like this music has some weight to it, and I could tell it was going to be like an intense episode, and it was. Now, here's the weird thing. The episode didn't knock me on my ass like it did a lot of people. And I don't know if it's because it was like it came with such a sort of legacy sort of built into it. I was kind of awed by it. Slightly distracted by all the guest stars out of makeup, which was also amazing. Like I loved their performances, but like I don't think I hit it. It didn't, at least on this first viewing, kind of hit me as hard as I think it hits some other people. But like, or hits most everybody. So I felt a little bit bad about that. Time will tell. I'll have to do some revisits. I did go and rewatch some scenes in it just because I wanted to see the scenes. Um,
Have you ever
but
heard of the EC comic Judgment Day? That was
yeah, famous. This is the one that's like the sort of famous story that called out racism in the time, but was
the Comics Code didn't want it released.
right. They didn't want it to happen. Because it had a closing panel that revealed that the astronaut sort of wasn't it watching like two, almost like the what's the Star Trek episode equivalent with the black white guy.
Let that be your last battlefield.
Kind of a little bit of a comic equivalent of that story where there's like a race of aliens of two different colors that are destroying each other, and the Earthman watching it takes off his helmet in the end, and we see that he's a black man, which was kind of unheard of at the time. And clearly they were presenting a future where this guy could be an astronaut and all of that stuff, and it would not be a weird thing. And was lamenting this tragic planet that's really doing exactly what was happening when those comics were being published. That's where we were. It's where we are. But on some level, I noticed that when the editor in this, or I guess he's not the editor. What's Odo playing in this?
He's the editor.
Okay, he's the editor. He says, and we'll get to that. We should just say more about the story in a second. But he says, "What should I do with the story then?" And he's like, "I don't know. Go file it away for 50 years or however long it takes for people to become colorblind." Which I think is like roughly about the time it would take to get to Deep Space Nine airing on TV. Not the era in which it's set, but the era in which it ran as a television show. So yeah, and even then, it's not like we can be like racism solved.
Yeah, that's what I think is kind of possibly like a weakness of the story, is that it does kind of present like, look how bad racism was in the 50s. Good thing it's not like that now. And it's
Right.
like, yeah, like you can publish these stories now, but there's still a lot of issues, especially with like the police brutality that we see in this
Sure.
episode and stuff. But
I think they might have been, certainly there was a falsity to it, but in the same way that JFK embodied a spirit of sort of feeling like some battles had been won and that there was a little bit of enlightenment happening, that Bill Clinton did something of the same in a smaller way in the 90s. And they might have even felt that, yes, some pretty true progress has been made. And like on some level you have to say that, because absolutely laws have been passed and things had changed. But yeah, the idea of like being able to like sort of rest on laurels feels way off right now, and probably felt a little less so in the 1990s.
there's not really like a much of like a metaphor or any kind of allegory or statement other than
It is what it is.
Yeah, like look how terrible bigotry is and stuff. But I think it does explore things in a very interesting way. Like it does show the I guess marriage between racism and capitalism, which just we happen to be
Sure.
recording this going into a holiday weekend here in the United States with Martin Luther King Day on Monday. But yeah, I'm gonna quote Dr. King, which a lot of people do, and is kind of convenient. I think he's often kind of misused, but that's a whole nother conversation. But one thing he did say is like, you can't have racism without capitalism. We see it here. The reason why the story is being suppressed is because the owners, Mr. Stone, the publisher, didn't want it copied. So the editor, who seems to be fairly passive, who Rene Auberjonois plays, he's like, maybe he would let this go. He admits that it's a good story, but he's going to toe the company line, and there's so a lot of these controls.
Yeah, he says he's like I've like put out a magazine. He's like, I'm not a crusader.
Yeah, and like who would say who could say they would do differently in his shoes, right? Like you want to have food on your table and a roof over your head. But
That question will be, I think, truly put to the test in the next to last episode where we find out about Kira's mother, by the way.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
This episode, the kind of the framing of it, where you have Cisco at the beginning of the episode, where he's so fatigued, and he's very much like Pike in The Cage, where I'm tired of deciding who lives and who dies. He's kind of like disengaged, like how he was in the first episode, Emissary, when he didn't want the assignment of DS9. And he's like, oh man, we just lost the Cortez, and I had friends on that ship and everything. And his dad, who never leaves Earth, like left Earth to come, give him some support. That's how dire things are.
I love, by the way, how they never let the dad just fall away and become like a forgotten supporting character. Joseph Sisko remains a strong and supportive character of his son throughout the whole thing, and never a guy who shies away from the truth.
But the significance of this story at this place in Deep Space Nine is that this is what Ben Sisko is fighting against, what Benny Russell lives through, and the weight that is on Sisko's shoulders. Bashir and the augments, they told him according to our projections, if we fight this war, it's going to be 900 billion dead and defeat. And he's convinced that they're not necessarily they're not the prophets. They don't necessarily have the future. They make mistakes. They could be wrong. Mm-hmm. But that is a hell of a fucking consequence. This is what the odds are saying will probably happen.
Right.
But if he doesn't fight this fight, if he doesn't fight the Dominion, he's dooming the entire Alpha Quadrant to have to live like Benny Russell, where you have to bow down to the master race.
Right.
And this vision that I guess the prophets give him, they don't really explain why he has this dream or why it's Benny Russell and all this stuff, but he comes out of it with conviction. And we know from a few episodes ago when he made that deal with the prophets, when he's like, you help me stop the Dominion, don't let them come through the wormhole anymore. And they agree to that, but they tell him there's going to be what's that word? Penance? Yeah. When they tell him there's going to be penance for this.
Yeah.
They have a plan for Sisko. It's not revealed yet by the time of this episode, but apparently, they want him to have some conviction and to be able to continue to fight the war by doing this. And I just think the episode itself, there is a certain level of artfulness to it.
Yeah, well, what they get to do, and part of why I like that they don't go through a great effort to explain exactly what the prophets were doing, is it allows it to the specificity of the episode, that the characters get to feel like characters, and in a way not like an allegory. They, where this stands for this and this stands for this. In fact, notably, a number of the people aren't exactly, they're not direct analogs to who they are on the station. They have elements of it, but
Jake is very different from Jimmy
Quark
the Hustler.
in particular is his biggest, is the best supporter. He's the fiery liberal of the Office bullpen.
Do you know who he's based on? Could you tell that some of these people were based on real science
I think
fiction
I've
writers?
heard that, but no, I don't know who any of them are based on.
Well, okay, the guy that Colm Meaney plays, who's obsessed with robots. That's an obvious one, right?
Oh, right. I think that's Asimov, probably.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Isaac Asimov. But Quark is his character Herb is supposed to be based on Harlan Ellison.
That makes total sense. Yeah, essentially a loudmouth lefty.
Yeah. And Kira, who goes by Casey Hunter, can't reveal that she's a woman. That was what DC Fontana did. So
I did. Now that you say that, I did read that somewhere. Yeah, that is a neat way to do it. But they felt like if you don't know that, you're not missing anything. You're catching that there's not just Benny the racism that Benny is facing, but there's also sexism towards her and different stripes of racism, like the kind I loved seeing Michael Dorn get to play this exuberant, outgoing ball player. I took away a while, with several of the characters, to recognize him. And by the way, the weirdest one for me was Martok as the artist. I was just like, who is this dude with a cigar? His voice is so goddamn familiar, but I cannot place it. And anyway, the only one, by the way, I didn't actually figure out until I saw who played what in the episode was I did not spot Nog as the news
Oh, is the
boy.
paper boy?
Yeah, it's obvious in retrospect, but he also does sound like kids, like New York kids of that era, like or like young men. Um, but anyway, but Worf is playing his character. Is it? Is it Willie?
Yeah, I guess might be like kind of based on Willie Mays or something, but
Yeah,
yeah, he's
but
Willie.
but he's a guy who they're like isn't Benny's wife is like or maybe somebody else is like, why haven't you moved uptown? And he's like, well, they look at me different there, and here I'm a local hero, and
Yeah.
And so you see sort of these different stripes
They
of
moved
injustices
downtown. They're
going
in
on.
Harlem, right? So they're already in like the uppest part.
And of course, you see all these other sort of elements that are as true today as then, like the cops hustling Benny, really lording it over him. They're like, oh, he's like, what you doing in that building? And he's like, I work there. Oh, are you the janitor?
Oh, and you know what else I love so much about this is that they don't like victim blame, like with Jimmy being killed by the police, because they like you see Benny talking to Jimmy, like why are you doing like this crime? Why don't you make like an honest buck? And Jimmy's basically saying like, I don't have any opportunities. I can be like a shoe shine boy, or I can go like jack people's watches and cars and stuff. And that is a very ugly side of reality, but that's another thing that
but yeah, you're right about not victim blaming, because Benny, when he finds out that he's been shot, he goes off on him. He's like, for breaking into a car, you killed him. It's just like you can feel, obviously, man, Avery Brooks went to town in this episode with a very vulnerable performance, and like
his whole like calm never got me a damn thing. When Julian is like, Benny, try to stay calm. He's like, calm never get, like, we see him be calm earlier with the cops, when he's dealing with that harassment. And then here, when he has like the breakdown, and that's such like a frustration that, I think it's fair to.
Well, it looks like it's so awful. It looks like it's going to kill him with internal angst and stuff at the end. Like, he's just breaks. And you know what? It struck me that like Trek has, I think, a history that's a very strong history, a very admirable history of these captains, especially male captains until we got to Janeway, giving vulnerable performances like Picard breaking down in Family, and what was the God, there's some. Well, Picard's had a few sequences where that's happened. I forget what some of the others were. But
Chain of Command.
Chain of Command. That's what I was trying to think of. And even like Kirk when Spock dies. Like these are the actors who have not been ashamed to show a side when they just fall into despair. But I doubt anyone has kind of fallen into it the way that Benny does in this episode.
The interesting thing about that scene, Nana Visitors talks about this in the What We Left Behind documentary, but she says that, because he was directing, when he's crying like that and breaks down and collapses on the floor, that's the director doing all that. There's no one standing around to say cut. Right? So everyone's just kind of like standing around, kind of like scared and awkward, wondering like, what do we do now?
Right.
But yeah, that's how into it he got.
He's like, all the scene will end when I say it's over, but until then you're going to have to kind of feel in a way something of the awkwardness and pain that the characters would feel in the fiction. There's some amazing dialogue in there where they're like, what was it? I think I'm not going to get the names right. Odo's character in it, the office manager or the editor, he says he is going to call the police, and he's like, "Go ahead and call the police."
The editor's name
Pabst,
is Pabst.
Pabst. He says they can't do anything to me, and he says you can pulp a story, but you can't destroy an idea. Don't you understand? That's ancient knowledge. And I was like, man, that's some writing there.
Yeah, I could talk about this episode all night. I almost feel like we're doing it an incredible disservice by talking about it with 8 other episodes, and it really deserves its own conversation.
Sure. We could do a full special on it. It'd be awesome if we could bring in a guest. But there's honestly so many even like fun small things, like when Dax shows up as the, I think, secretary, and
she's got a worm in her belly.
That's disgusting. She's like, that's interesting. That's disgusting.
I like how they're like, "Bless you, my child," when she says that she reads a lot of science fiction. Like, the world needs more people like you. Yeah,
And even the premise of it, by the way, just that hook, that a piece of art that looks like 50s style version of concept art for Deep Space Nine is what inspires him, and that he would be inspired to write about Cisco, that it has this extremely poignant thing at the end where the one way it might get published, it doesn't, but it could have, was if it was like a dream story about a black captain, so like nobody would have to worry about it being a real idea. And what is it? They debated at the time. He's like, oh, if it's a dream, then it loses all meaning. And then Bashir's character is like, oh, I think it makes it more poignant.
Right, they're talking about like the episode itself, because
it gets
like a dream.
way meta, and like there's just so much stuff going on in the episode that you're right. We could talk about.
Yeah,
it
and I gotta applaud Ira Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler on the writing, and I'm so glad. In the '90s, I don't think we thought about this as much about like you need. Like black voices to tell a black story and stuff like that. But I'm so glad that like they were aware of that and they got like Avery to direct this episode.
That's a great point, because you're right. Although it's something that I see more of now. It's especially in the comics industry. Since I'm a comic shop manager, I see that there's a lot more effort on Marvel and DC and other comic companies' part to, if they're going to tell a story about people of color or women or anybody who's been marginalized, there's a concerted effort to get those people to tell their own stories. In the 90s, that was not the case. That was not standard.
It was written by two Jewish dudes, so I mean they probably knew their fair share about bigotry.
There's some shared history.
It wasn't their story that they were telling, so that's I'm glad that they brought in Avery in such a large capacity. That was the right call to make. I guess the last thing I'll say on this episode is the Bible verse that Joseph quotes at the end. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept that faith. Which is appropriate for talking about both Benny Russell's conviction that we saw, and then Sisko's kind of renewed conviction and inspiration that he has after experiencing this dream. But the coolest thing about that Bible verse, Dave, do you know where that's found in the Bible?
No. That's
2 Timothy 4:7.
Oh, Father. I hope that's a coincidence and they didn't pick it because of that, because it's a great use of it in the thing. It has to be coincidence that was 4:7.
It's just like Little Green Men. They go back in time to 1947. Like, that is the year of the Roswell incident. It just worked out beautifully.
47's a magical number. By the way, I see Jill in the comments mentions another breakdown that Sisko will have, but doesn't want to tell me because it's next season. Thank you, Jill. I appreciate it. I am loving not knowing what's going on. We are about to hit an episode where Dax gets very badly hurt in it, and I was like, I know Dax dies. I just know it. And I don't know any context for it. So I was like, oh, this seems like kind of a sort of a normal type episode. Oh shit, is this the episode where she dies? So I get these interesting highs and lows, knowing sometimes a little bit, but usually not enough to really guess. And she doesn't die in the episode, but
we'll get there eventually.
On with the show.
But before we get to that, we have to talk about Season 6, Episode 14, One Little Ship, written by Bradley Thompson and David Weddle, directed by Alan Croker. O'Brien, Dax, Bashir, and their runabout are reduced in size while investigating an anomaly. Meanwhile, the Jem'Hadar attack and commandeer the Defiant, leaving the runabout crew with no choice but to take their miniature ship inside the Defiant and help Sisko and the others recapture the vessel. Dave, I think this episode got a lot of hate back in the day. People thought it was the stupidest shit they'd ever seen. I've always thought this episode was fine. I have fun with it. I think it's good. And yeah. I put out a tweet the other day asking people, what they thought about it and just saying, this is one of the ones we'll be talking about. This episode got so much love.
Interesting.
I think people have come around to it, but I don't know. What about you? Was it stupid? Is it good? Is it fun? What did you think?
So I liked the episode. I didn't think it was amazing, but I had just like a month or two ago rewatched the kind of classic adventure techno thriller from the 60s, Fantastic Voyage, where people go inside a little miniaturized sub into a human body to try and deal with sort of a dangerous medical condition, and they have an adventure inside the human body. And of course, I like the movie Inner Space, which was a more comedic,
Yeah,
action
80s version of that.
80s
I've
take on
never
that.
seen. I should watch that.
Oh, you should. You're an '80s guy. You'll
Yeah.
like Inner Space. Fathery, it has that wildness you can only find where there's weirdly adult stuff, and then there's weirdly just ridiculous, silly stuff in it. And there's some good adventure and like good special effects because it was also that like Spielbergy type era. Anyway, but I like stuff where people get miniaturized. Is my point.
And I like that they did something new with it here. I love the idea of they had to, provide their own miniaturized oxygen because their blood couldn't process the regular size oxygen. I loved that. And so now whenever I watch like stuff where people like shrink down too small, I always think like they shouldn't be able to breathe. The oxygen molecules would be too big.
I couldn't believe they addressed that. Yeah.
But I guess the Terratons didn't get small enough. It was a problem for, if you remember in the animated series, the Terraton incident where they didn't shrink this small though. So
yeah, maybe that was the deal. Anyway, yeah, like it was pretty obvious where they were headed with the plot of them getting miniaturized, and suddenly, some Jem'Hadar ship comes along just in time to make a problem for it. But then, as soon as I was like, "Are they about to go Fantastic Voyage Die Hard to rescue the Defiant?"
Yeah, that's exactly what they're gonna do.
And I was in for it. I was there for it when they were flying through Jeffrey's tubes and stuff and getting out of the way of like fusion going, like cells activating. And I was there for it when the ship had to bump up and press a button to activate a door.
Don't worry, I have a gentle touch. That's not what Worf tells me. Dr. Bashir got a little carried away with the dad jokes. That was very little of him but I guess that's my only real complaint with this episode. I really like the Jem'Hadar bigotry. I think that's an interesting thing, and it reminded us that the Dominion took like a big L earlier in the season when they lost the station. So it's good that they keep reminding us how dangerous. It's like, okay, the war is not over yet. They've set up shop in the Alpha Quadrant. They're breeding these new Jem'Hadar soldiers that are customized for combat in the Alpha Quadrant. Like there's still a serious danger.
And there's a schism. There's a schism between them and the remaining Gammas.
Yeah, the Alphas and the Gammas.
I thought that was a really cool,
I'm an Alpha, bro. I don't have to listen to you. You're a Gamma. That's why you're second and I'm first because I'm an Alpha.
I mean, that's pretty much how it goes. But that's cool because, wars evolve and all sides, find sudden changes and pressures and have to deal with them organically. And this was an interesting one to bring up for, essentially the bad guys of the show is that, there was distinct outcomes of the prophets zapping all those Gammas away.
I've heard Ira Stephen Bear say at times that like, oh, this episode was too silly. We shouldn't have used the Jem'Hadar. We should have like brought back the Pakleds or had like a Ferengi crew take over or something like. But I'm like, no, it's fun to do it with the Jem'Hadar because it allows you to see, explore more sides of this war. And that's why we got like the whole like Alpha Jem'Hadar versus Gamma Jem'Hadar thing. And there's not like a deep message to this episode, but it does have like a bit of a message of like, yeah, when you work together as a team, you're more likely to be successful. And that's why, we see Sisko and his group, working together to sabotage the Defiant or stall and all. And then, like Dax and Bashir and O'Brien trying to help them out. And, they don't have like, I don't know, it's very simple, very basic,
Sure.
Well, cartoonish almost, but I mean, at least it has that level of substance to it.
Sure. And I don't think Trek always has to deliver a morality play. It can have some adventure fun, and this is like straight up adventure for most of its time. It struck me that Sisko in the episode Rocks and Shoals, where he was trying to, manipulate the loyalist Jem'Hadar into essentially turning on their Vorta leader. And it was so hard because that guy was just utterly devoted. And then here he actually found a case where he could work with manipulating him because the schism was already there, so he could exploit it. And I was like, oh, that must have been so much easier for him than that Rocks and Shoals episode.
Yeah, a bit easier here. And I think part of why it works so well is it tells you right up front, Kira is laughing at like, oh, also like they're shrinking, they're miniaturizing, it doesn't try to take it too seriously from the very beginning. I love like when they're talking about like, oh, this is nuts. Are we really going to like fly the runabout inside of the Defiant? I just love like Jadzia's reaction when they tell her the plan. She just says, I love it.
Yeah. She's always had the thrill seeker gene.
Yeah.
And I loved
300 years old. Like, what have you not done? Have you ever flown a miniaturized runabout? Here's your opportunity.
I also did like Nana Visitor laughing about it early on because she gets so many kind of angsty and serious scenes. It was fun to see her just kind of just think something was silly and just laugh her ass off at it.
And I'm a big fan of like the Worf and Jadzia romance. Yeah, Worf's one of my favorite characters in all of Star Trek. I mention that all the time. When I moved in with my partner Antonia, and I showed her every episode of Star Trek that existed at the time, and we went through all 700 episodes in 1 year. She really resonated with like the Jadzia and Worf stuff, so that kind of made me appreciate it even more.
Nice.
But we see some of like that good like actually like healthy relationship stuff with them in here, where they're talking about like he secretly, I guess not secretly, but like he doesn't talk about it in front of all the fellow officers, but he composes these poems for his wife whenever she does something cool. And I love like Nog like covering for Worf when they're like, oh, Worf, tell us about your poetry, and Nog kind of helping him out.
Yeah.
But then at the very end, when they're hanging out at the bar and he's like reading, he's joking around with her. He's finally developed a sense of humor, and he's like, there once was a little ship that took a little trip. And I love like there's this very genuine Worf smile that Michael Dorn only gets to do like a few times throughout all of the many Star Trek episodes he's been in. But like whenever he does it, it's just golden. I love it.
Yeah. It's actually one of the things that I liked best, one of the small things I liked best about Far Beyond the Stars was letting him, he and a lot of the other actors in there, cut loose in sort of roles that got to take him outside the restraints in some cases. Worf is a very restrained character. It's built into the character. And so it was great to see him do that. And yeah, I was post-marriage Worf, in many different ways has been revealing himself, showing little vulnerabilities, moments of where he can kind of let that smile out, and I was there for it. It's in some ways the things they did after the marriage made me buy into it much better than I did in the lead up to it.
No, you're absolutely right by saying that, Dave. You're not the first person I've heard say that. A lot of people, they don't really get into that romance initially. And yeah, it kind of works in reverse. You'd think that they would explore it before the big marriage episode. They kind of did things in the wrong order. But, hey, a war was going on. These kids want to get married now while they're still alive. So, we'll hurry up and do the marriage. And then, yeah, we can show you the fun of the relationship later, I guess.
Right.
The last thing I have to say on this episode is just that it is fun to see Quark and Odo kind of, I guess they're bonding a little. They're both in on the joke about like, are you sure you got restored to your normal size? You both look a little short to me right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, there is a shared camaraderie of poking, of like busting somebody's balls a little bit. And Star Trek doesn't engage in it too often, but, even Pike on Strange New Worlds did it a little bit when there was like a little light, I guess I'd say, hazing of who's the new crew member?
Ortega's,
it's Uhura.
Uhura, yeah. Uhura.
Right, yeah. And I think that's such a human thing that even people who are don't really find it in themselves to like tease for the most part can enjoy a little bit of that sometimes. And Odo is a guy who is not easy to do that, so it was, yeah, I agree. It was nice to see that happening. Good ending.
Well, let's go on to Season 6, Episode 15, Honor Among Thieves, teleplay by Renee Echeverria, story by Philip Kilm, directed by Alan Eastman. O'Brien, working undercover for Starfleet Intelligence, infiltrates the Orion Syndicate, the Alpha Quadrant's main organized crime ring, and befriends the man he will have to betray. This is another good use of the war backdrop, in my opinion. Dave, I hear some people complain about this episode, it's like a filler episode. It's just this weird distraction or diversion from the epic war story they're telling. It's no, this is just another aspect of the war you can explore. Is what if the Dominion tried to use organized crime to get an advantage against the Federation? That actually happens a lot, when there's actual conflicts between nations and real life history on Earth. Sometimes people will go to criminal organizations to try to undercut their enemy or something.
Right. And those are organizations that have money too, and all wars run on money. So that said, Father E, I think I am going to be a person who didn't really like the episode. This was maybe the weakest one for me overall. I think. Because I was excited to see the Orion Syndicate, and then a little saddened throughout the episode that it was kind of a traditional kind of mob and undercover cliches that sort of felt like sort of noir tropes to me, and I wanted the Syndicate to be maybe. I liked that they were dangerous. I liked the actual plan to kill the Klingon ambassador and implicate Gowron and drive a wedge between the Federation and the Klingon allies. Cool premise. But like I did feel like the kind of schlubby mobster that an undercover guy finds some loyalty to felt a little cliched.
Yeah, I probably haven't seen as many like movies like that explore that trope, or I hadn't in 1998 when I watched this for the first time.
Sure.
I know it's I've never seen the movie, but I saw the trailers for the movie. It actually came out shortly before this episode, and I think might have been an influence on it. But it's Al Pacino as the gangster, and then Johnny Depp is the FBI agent who is, what's the name of Donnie
Brasco.
Donnie Brasco. Okay, I've never seen it, but I've seen the trailer, and I know enough from the trailer that I know it's very similar to this.
Yeah, you know what? I've never seen Donnie Brasco either.
Okay.
I've seen
but
like.
You remember it, right? It was a.
Oh yeah, like it's arguably it's the iconic movie and name associated with like going deep undercover and maybe not knowing how to get out and all that stuff.
Yeah, I actually really like this one though. I like the O'Brien Must Suffer episodes. I always love Colomini's performance. I love the conflict that O'Brien has to wrestle with here, and maybe it has been explored in a bunch of other stuff that I haven't seen, but I love like O'Brien. He's not an actor, he's not like a liar, he's just basically just like being himself, and
right.
Like his name, his undercover name, like he's still like, what's the most Irish name ever? O'Brien. What's the second most Irish name ever? Connolly. So
yeah.
And but like that bond he forges with Bilby, who's played by one of the dudes from Space, not the main guy, kind of like the secondary dude on Space 1999.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know much about that show. I never watched it, but
me neither. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but yeah, it was not a thing for me really.
And he's shown up in Star Trek before. He was in a Next Generation episode, a Final Mission or Last Mission, the one where Wesley leaves the Enterprise. He's that guy hanging out with Wesley and Picard stuck on that planet. But I like his performance. I thought he sold like the sentimentality of like, he's just like a family man, just like this guy working hard for his family and everything. And I like, the Starfleet intelligence guy that O'Brien's working for, who's, like kind of like a more like by the book dude who's like, I understand you might be, this might be confusing for you. I've been undercover before, but you don't need to worry about that. Don't think about that. And O'Brien's like really concerned for this guy, and just it's very much to me. What it reminds me of is more as Reservoir Dogs, of that kind of like loyalty and obligation. And that's kind of an easy. That's like an easy way to get me on your side if you're telling a story that has to deal with I don't know, for some reason I always like gravitate towards like obligation.
Yeah, sure.
And like duty and loyalty and stuff like that.
Big thing in samurai stories, mob stories also weirdly cover it, even though there's tons of betrayals too. But yeah, like Reservoir Dogs, if this was more like Reservoir Dogs, then at the end when O'Brien gave himself up, the dude would have shot him.
The whole like Larry, I'm a cop. We just spoiled that.
I don't think so necessarily. There's lots of things that happen in Reservoir Dogs. Anyway, but I think I wanted it actually though to stick with that for a minute. I wanted it to have a little bit more of that edge, maybe. And I think I also would have liked to have seen it like. By the way, there's a great set shot of the like exterior of the
Sirius is the name of the planet.
Yeah, and it has like a train, like a tram thing going by.
It occurs to me, I think this is the first time we've ever seen Orion written language in Star Trek, which they reuse in Enterprise, and it's shown up on like lower decks quite a bit, and in Discovery, the Emerald Chain has the same like Orion style writing.
Oh, that's cool.
I wish they would actually show an Orion, but Rick Berman thought that was.
That's where I was. I was like, you are going to have some Orions.
Well, they would have
Orion
if they could
Syndicate.
have, but Rick Berman didn't. He thought that was too stupid to show, green people So I don't know why Bolians are okay, but
That's a weird
Orions
hang
aren't.
up. I'm sure he was like, it's kind of like thinking, if you think about it in the cheapest way, where it's just somebody with green makeup smeared on them badly, like you could be like, yeah, I can see how that's too cheesy for the 90s or whatever. But they reimagined Klingons, they reimagined everybody, who they bring forward. So that
But
ultimately, that's a stupid hang up.
but I didn't have your issue where you needed it to be like more. What did you say a second ago? Like more dangerous, more gritty, or whatever. Like I
Either
was
a
like
little bit more edge to it, or
more
I also
edge.
kind of, I think I wanted to maybe the Orion Syndicate to not feel like a sort of direct mob analog. I would have liked it to be like kind of more like, oh, he's in a place where he doesn't know the rules, and we the viewers don't know the rules, because it's not like mobsters in the Godfather
Yeah,
movies.
no, they wanted to do a crime story, but in Star
Right.
Trek, just like they wanted to do the Magnificent Seven, but do it as the Magnificent Ferengi. Uh, but I always thought that like it was pretty scary because one, like, okay, they have a guy within Starfleet who gave them a list of all the undercover operatives, so at any minute they might be like, oh, we know that O'Brien is undercover. And then two, we see the what they did to that poor bastard for just he was doing some business on the side and didn't pay the syndicate their due, and like, okay, you
Mm-hmm.
get executed for that.
Right.
And that Vorta, I love that Vorta. Like he does like the most Vorta thing, where he's like, "Oh, let me see if I can pick which one is the like." I could totally see like Jeffrey Combs as Wayoon doing like that. Oh, let me see if I could pick the traitor. That might be fun for me to do.
For sure.
And it's the same Vorta who is commanding the Jem'Hadar who captured the Defiant in the last episode in one little
Oh,
ship.
huh.
This is the last we see of him, but I just it's good continuity. Showing that dude. He does more than just one appearance.
Because it's come up in the comments, I will say I appreciated that O'Brien took in his cat after things went south.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
Chester. Yeah.
Good job, O'Brien.
And we see more Chester going forward. He'll pop up a
Really,
couple more
I was
times.
not
So
sure
yeah.
if that was just kind of a one-off, and that then they
Nope.
would sort of then forget about it.
O'Brien has a pet cat now, just Data had Spot, and Book has Grudge, and now O'Brien has Chester.
O'Brien seems more like a dog guy, but I appreciate that he was stepping outside his comfort zone
Well,
for
it's
his
more like
dear
that
buddy.
obligation and stuff. He's like, what?
Sure.
And I love like Bilby's like, hey, if I'm about to go die, you just really like fucked me over. My life is over. The only way for me to save my family is to go get killed right now. But uh, if you don't mind, if it's not too much trouble to ask, will you look after my cat? Just
Mm-hmm.
I like Bilby there. He's a good dude, even though he did murder that guy who sold him some bad disruptors. But I
Yeah.
would have. I feel like I would have struggled with it the same way O'Brien does if I was in his shoes here. I thought it was pretty relatable, which is kind of what they always intend with O'Brien. You have like all these. We have Space Jesus is in command of the station. We have a genetically engineered super genius doctor. We have this woman with a 300-year-old worm in her belly. All these different. And it's like, look, here's
And
a
even
dude.
Kira, the revolutionary fighter,
Yeah,
is
and
not something that most of us can directly relate to.
then look, here's this blue collar dude who showed up to work with his toolkit and his lunchbox, and he's like, yeah, he's just like the normal. So I plugged into like the O'Brien relatability here,
Yeah, that's a fair point. I dig that.
and I think I just deceit doesn't come natural to me. Like
Mm.
I really don't like lying to people or having to like mislead people, and so I think that would make me nervous too, like the same way like O'Brien seems out of his element and uncomfortable with it. It is weird that Starfleet can just pull anyone and be like, hey, we need you to like go
Yeah,
undercover. Like that's
I mean
if I
that's
existed in the Star Trek universe, that's one reason why I would not want to be in Starfleet. I have several, but yeah, Starfleet would not be for me. That's one reason why.
I mean, obviously that's one of those ones that's kind of this is a trope for the show. It gets our characters to do kind of different jobs and stuff outside their normal wheelhouse. And I think for a lot of people, the idea of being able to, almost in the same way you would on the Hollow Suites, play a little bit of being a spy or an undercover, detective or whatever, is it can seem fun. And I think that's one of the kind of interesting things about these episodes is they'll take something that like when he's first infiltrating them at the beginning and he does that cool it's pretty sly infiltration where he like he gets it one of their guys gets shocked because of a thing he sets up, and then he's like, oh, I can fix that, and you're like, oh, this guy's on it, and that's the fun side of the undercover. It's like, oh, he pulled off a clever
Or like
play.
when he gets like the new suit. When Bilby's like,
sure.
Let me get you some sharp looking clothes.
He's rising up through the ranks. He's looking smoother, and then then they kind of hit you with the reality, right? So they do want you to sort of think, oh, yeah, maybe it wouldn't be all that fun. That's the whole thematic of Deep Space Nine. Oh, maybe it wouldn't be all that fun.
But I like that, Bilby, he seemed like, O'Brien, you seem like a guy, you should be like a family man and he is, like, he's like known in Star Trek for being like the most like family man guy. So it's like Bilby, like, you read a lot of it right. You just got like the important stuff wrong, but
right.
It got you killed.
Pathetic mobsters also, like, that's its own interesting history. I don't know if you've ever seen Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets, but
no.
Like that's I feel like the one that's about the Biggest Loser type mobsters. And there's a lot of 70s movies that I feel like that zeroed in a little bit on kind of lame mobsters, and they weren't all Michael Corleone, right?
Well, yeah, but like Bilby was so low level, like they weren't even trying to, like get him or like bust his operation. They were just trying to figure out who in Starfleet is working with the Syndicate. Was the whole point of all of this. So yeah, it's sad, it's tragic, but O'Brien is gonna take care of Chester, so at least Chester will be okay. Now Molly has a pet cat, I guess. Let's move on to Season 6, Episode 16, Change of Heart, written by Ronald D. Moore, directed by David Livingston. On a mission to recover a Federation informant on the Dominion world of Sakara, Dax is injured and Worf must choose between completing the mission or saving his wife. Meanwhile, O'Brien enlists Bashir's help to defeat Quark in a game of Tongo. Dave, what do you think seeing this for the first time?
I'm trying to figure out, Fathery, which episode it is that is the one that you hated. I'm wondering if this is it. I actually ended up liking this episode a surprising amount because of the Worf and Dax stuff, which to me is actually the best written that they have been.
And as I know in the past you've struggled with it.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to tell you, wait till after they get married and it gets better, because I didn't want you to have like high hopes or high expectations.
Right. And good job there, Father, because I have been enjoying the reveals. They get to be like, you've got a slide up here of them like they're sort of being like playful and sexy in the bedroom here. They get to what is it? Oh, right. Worf gets a great line early on when he's watching his wife play Tongo against Quark, and he ends up losing because, he's got a fair amount of confidence in her, but Quark's on a roll and he does take her down.
You know what I hate about that, though?
What?
Why does O'Brien like Scotch? Like, that just seems so weird for an Irishman to prefer Scottish whiskey over Irish whiskey.
Did the writer just forget what his nationality was?
I don't know. We'll have to ask Ron Moore, who I think
let's see if we can get him on for an episode.
Yeah.
I'm sure it shouldn't be too hard to get. He's not doing anything.
He's just running
running a few shows.
Yeah, probably like the best non-Star Trek show on TV right now for all mankind. But other than that, he's not too busy.
But Worf gets a great line in there. He goes and he says to Jadzia, he said, "I'd rather lose betting on you than win betting on someone else." And I was like, and she's like, you said the right thing or something like that. And I was like, that was a good line.
And I like this episode too. It's not the one that I dislike.
Okay.
We're coming up close to it, but my favorite line out of this entire episode was when Worf says, he was known to be quite humorous on the Enterprise, and I just love Jadzia saying like, "Oh, that must have been one dull ship."
Yeah, that seemed like a meta gag that was pretty pointed and kind of funny. It's sort of mean too. But I did always think that what do you call it? That Next Generation, I think, struggled to get their humor right. It's not that they couldn't do it. There's some winners in there, but it was a struggle sometimes.
There's some other fun stuff on the runabout. They mentioned the Vulcan Forge. They're talking about like honeymoon destinations. The Vulcan Forge, that's where little kid Spock ran out too in the animated series in
Right.
a yesteryear. And they also mentioned the Andorian homeworld and call it a Andor. Talk about mountain climbing on Andor, which I hate that now. Like now, whenever someone says Andor, people are going to think you're talking about a Disney Plus show and not the Andorian
No, they're
homeworld.
watching Star Trek. They know what Andor is on Star Trek. Trekkies know what Andor is.
And we get a new vacation planet, Casperia Prime, which they mention again in the next episode, which is kind of funny. But yeah, like their mission to go grab the Cardassian informant, and you said you thought like, oh, he might actually let her die here. That's actually some people think that would have been appropriate. Like Terry Farrell actually said like, okay, I'm not coming back for season 7. Dave, you said you already know about this,
right? I know at least some basics about it, and I think I kind of knew that there was like some outside stuff going on, that this was like contract negotiation stuff, but I don't know. I don't know details.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that in the next couple of weeks, I think. But here, Worf, he doesn't do his duty. He goes back and saves his wife, and Terry Farrell was like, no, this is like the great opportunity to kill my character. Let's do it. And the director, David Livingston, he was also like, yeah, I don't buy it. I don't think Worf would save her. I think he would do the mission. I disagree with them. I absolutely love Worf, who puts like honor and duty above all else. He loved his wife more.
Well, that's the whole thing is like this sort of cements that this is, for him, became a once in a lifetime love, right? That level that did make him do something that's unexpected. That's always some of the most interesting things you can do with a character, is when they surprise you. And yes, Worf is a guy who very much kind of writes himself, because you would usually be able to guess what he'll do in a given situation. So I appreciated being surprised by him. I did think it was like broadly structured like a kind of a ho-hum episode, with a little bit of like the get out a prisoner. Okay, it's a sort of a jungle episode. It didn't seem that it felt a little bit lightweight. And then she gets injured. And then, like, there was a certain point where she was like, they hit him with that anticoagulant blast that came up in some other episode.
That's what killed Kike Munoz.
Remember? Yeah. Right, and I'm like, that's nasty.
Slowly bled to death. Yeah,
it's a nasty way to go. Yeah. And the kind of realistic talk about like blood pressure dropping, it just feels a little more clinical than they sometimes get on Star Trek.
I've heard of real life doctor applaud this episode, like the way that they talk about like the trauma care was like actually like pretty accurate.
That's interesting. Well, at some point, Terry Farrell, I credit to her and the makeup artist.
She's so good in this.
She looks bad.
She looks like she's dying. Yeah.
She looks like she's dying. She looks you can feel like the emotion on her as she's like kind of knowing that they're joking, but she actually might die. And then I was like, oh, it went from being a slightly ho-hum episode to I was like very involved in it near the end.
And Worf's guilt, like he turned back and when he was like the 12-year-old boy who accidentally killed the kid in a soccer match, he headbutted the opponent.
Right.
He turned. He's like look at this. Like anytime like I try to like cut loose and have fun, like bad things happen. Like how shame on me for doing this.
Yeah, it reminded me of the episode in the where Wes is at the academy. I don't know if First Duty. I don't know if that's the one. If Ron Moore wrote that too. I felt like maybe not.
Yes. Yeah, he did.
But that was one where there was like, there are going to be consequences, and they're actually not going to be ones you can easily turn back from. Although I think like one of Sisko's things, he's like, sorry, he's like, you made a lot of mistakes here, and you could have potentially saved millions of lives or whatever, and you're probably not going to get a command as a result of this.
He gets shoot out, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily true. that second part proved true.
No. I think it is true.
Not in Starfleet, I guess.
Yeah, Terry Matalas has said, like in Picard season 3, we don't know what's going on with Worf. We'll find out in a few weeks when Picard season 3 comes out. But like Worf has like the rank of a captain, but he's not in command of a ship. And Terry said, because of this episode. And there was a lot of people, I guess, like have advocated for like a Captain Worf show, or people want to see like Worf in command of the Enterprise or something. And I've always like, no, like his choice to save his wife needs to have those consequences. This is what he chose. Like he knew that he would probably never get in command of a ship. But
Right.
he like it doesn't matter, that stuff that's like always been so important to him doesn't matter if Jadzia's life is on the line. That's what he wants even more. And so yeah, he should have to like live with those consequences after that, and always think like, yeah, I if I could do it all over again, I would do it the same way. I love Jadzia. I would prioritize her life above all else.
If anything, they could bring it up, like in whatever,
Mm-hmm.
like if they were to do some new show with him, they should reference the episode.
Like
they
the
should,
novels have mentioned it and stuff.
yeah, remind viewers about the sacrifice he made, so that the drama can still recur. But yeah, let it be what it is. I loved at the end, by the way, when she's, I guess, kind of starting to recover on the Enterprise, and she's starting to realize what happened, and that him going back for her might have really had huge consequences. And she says, "Are you in trouble?" And he's like, "I have been in trouble before." I'm like, that is actually that's going to be like one of my favorite Worf lines, because it's such a simple thing, but it means so much in this context. It's like he actually did give up a lot for her, and arguably maybe made the wrong choice as far as the war effort. So there were real consequences.
I even forgive, like, we talked about in the wedding episode, like it's so like unfair that like Worf got like everything he asked for in that episode, and Jadzia just had to like suck it up and live with it. But here's like the comeuppance. Here's where he's like, you know what, like all that Klingon pride and honor and tradition, like all of that is less important than you are. So I think with this coming after the wedding episode, it kind of makes that stuff a lot more palatable, in my opinion. And I find the wedding episode so fun. It's easy to forget anyways.
Totally. Father, do you happen to know, weird question, do you know what year this came out?
1998.
98. Okay.
This would have been, I think, in like March, maybe April.
Okay. It was 98 is good enough. I was only trying to figure out if it came out after The English Patient.
No, I don't know anything about that, and don't want to know anything about that, because we're kind of getting low on time. But the cool line from Cisco is that this is going to be strictly off the record, but I would have done the exact same thing if it was Jennifer.
Sorry, say that again, Father. I had a little glitch on my end of like a lag.
Cisco's response of this is off the record, but if it had been Jennifer, I would have done the same thing.
Right. That's I appreciated that sort of real talk from him, where he could be. It had the same feel of like the dressing down that Picard gives Wes in the first duty, where it was like, oh, this is grown up talk, right?
The B story, the Tongo game, where we see like Dr. Bashir still has like these romantic feelings for Jadzia, and Quark either does or he's just pretending to win the game. He says he won't show his hands and won't show all the cards in his hand, but he got his 207th straight victory. I liked O'Brien being like, we got to beat this guy. We can't let him keep winning on this winning streak, but.
It's a weird subplot in the sense that it ends early and it doesn't.
They did that intentionally, kind of lightweight. Though. They didn't want to cut back and forth between like goofy stuff and serious.
Once
stuff.
They got to the serious ending, I get it, and then I liked most of the stuff in there. That he I kind of like the win for Quark too, to be honest.
Yeah, and it seems a little fishy to have like. Aren't you not supposed to like do things like gamble with like your genetically engineered augment brain? But I feel like Quark wouldn't have minded the challenge. But I do think if Bashir had won this game, Quark's immediate reaction would be like, "I thought you Starfleet humans are supposed to be all moral and ethical. Aren't you not supposed to use your brain to like cheat at gambling and stuff?" And I think he would have like talked his way into getting like his money back or something. That would have been his trump card or something. But.
Yeah, I get if they had done a denouement to that sequence, I think that could have worked. But
let's move on to season 6, episode 17, "Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night." Written by Ira Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler, directed by Jonathan West, Kira uses the Orb of Time to travel into the past after Dukat claims, I'm so disgusted with this, I don't even want to read the synopsis, that her mother was once his lover during the occupation. This is the episode that I really dislike. I love season 6, but this might be my least favorite episode in all of DS9. Like, I did not need the, it turned, everyone thinks Dukat's a bastard. Well, you know what? He's even worse. He used to bang Kira's mom. But Dave, what did you think about it?
So as I was watching it, I was at first I was kind of shocked that the premise. It did seem like something that Gul Dukat would do potentially. Just a cruel move of the Dukat who'd been broken by Cisco a few episodes back. I thought it seemed kind of more than a little bit outrageous that she would want to time travel to see if her mom was in fact a sexual slave to the Cardassians. Was a weird premise. And like I felt like it was like Game of Thrones kind of lurid territory, or like the worst part of Game of Thrones.
It's gratuitous. It's unnecessary. We already hate Dukat. Like, we didn't. It would be basically if they were also just like, oh, and you know what else? It wasn't the Borg that killed your wife, Cisco. That was me who murdered Jennifer. You're just like, oh, he's just responsible for like every bad thing that ever happened to anyone.
Yeah. I thought it was. Like, there is something of an interesting question of like how much, like, broadly in the bigger picture, like people who in any way compromise themselves for an occupying army, like what degree, at what point do they cross over from a collaborator who should die, and at what point are they like someone who did what they had to do to survive? And they explore that, but I sort of felt like it lacked some of the nuance I like from DS9. To make something like that work. Not that it didn't have any, but I wasn't wild about it.
And the time travel, it is kind of ridiculous. Like the whole this is the orb of time. If the prophets want me to go back in time, they'll send me back in time, which is weird. It's like, oh, did they want Charlie Brill to go back in time and kill Kirk with an exploding triple? Like, that was the whole thing. That was like Darwin's. I just assume he figured out some way to like hack the orb, but that's kind of silly. Like, I wish that this wasn't time travel. I always love time travel, but the two episodes I don't like in season 6, my favorite season of all Star Trek, both have a time travel twist to them. We'll get to the other one next week, but that all is a bit of a stretch. There are things I do like in this episode. I really love Nana Visitors as Kira, but I like seeing, I guess like how miserable the Bajorans are under the oppression of the Cardassians, the hungry Bajorans in the camp, which she sees like her little kid version of herself. I like the Bajoran collaborator, Basso, I think is the name of the character. Mm-hmm. He's in UHF. He's like Weird Al's buddy in UHF.
That's creepy. That guy was a super creep in this one.
Yeah, the actor was like really good. Dukat's always creepy, but I can't imagine like the whole like fixation he's had with Kira over the years. Like, how has he never brought this up? We do know sometimes like Cardassians, they do have like these long plans. Like, Dukat is the guy who left like that Cardassian kid on Bajor, knowing that like he could use him against this political enemy. You remember that? Like the guy had like that kid on Bajor.
He does do the long-term thinking of a Cardassian strategist.
It feels so like out of left field that he was just like out of the blue. He's still on like that stolen shuttlecraft from the Han show. You see him on like the shuttlecraft interior messaging Kira, but like, why now all of a sudden after you spent some time in a cave with Cisco, now you're just gonna drop this bombshell on Kira? That just all seemed so weird.
They made it. It actually, the part of that was so Game of Thronesy to me was to realize that, we've known that Dukat like has an interest in Kira herself, too, like a romantic interest in her, and the fact that was like, and I heard behind the scenes that they potentially wanted them to have something happen. I'm so glad they didn't.
That was never.
But also,
that was never written. That might have been an idea that they floated around, but they never tried to write that into anything.
It did seem like there was some dissenting opinions over what had been planned and what hadn't. But if nothing else, Dukat did sleep with her mom and then wanted to sleep with the daughter. That's just like, that's for sure in canon, and that's maybe a little beyond the pale. Moonlight.
The thing I did like though is that there's always Star Trek always has all the temporal prime directive stuff. Like we can't interfere with the past, we can't change the timeline, and I love in Star Trek when we can explore non-Starfleet perspectives. Like here we see Bajoran resistance fighter. What's your stance on time travel? With Kira, it's like, oh, I don't care. I'm gonna go back in time and blow up Hitler. Even
Right.
if I kill my mom in the process. She basically tries to plant a bomb, and they do mention this bombing attempt in Waltz. Remember when Dukat is like going on his rant to Cisco, and he's like, I brought in all these generous reforms, and then 1 month later, someone blows up a bomb outside of my quarters. So we see
that's
here.
That's an impressive level of continuity. Um, I will say I can on some level also appreciate that most time travel is we have to do this to save the galaxy or whatever, something big, and this one was like I have to do this for a personal reason, and
But her personal
for her
reason's
that was
dumb.
enough. It is dumb. But I can appreciate the idea of a time travel story for a personal reason. If nothing else, it seems bad to us, but it was so horrific to her that she had to know. Yeah, like honestly, I think it weakens Kira's character. But yeah, it's. I thought that the execution was okay. The execution was solid enough, but I could have skipped it myself.
Another good thing that this episode does give us the Alamo in Deep Space, like the literal Alamo. I talked about the Ferengi Alamo earlier, but here we have O'Brien and Bashir back on the station. They're talking about like, oh yeah, we should do like an Alamo holosuite program. So that seed has been planted, and it will grow in the episodes to come. And I guess if I got to compliment it again, I'll say like I liked Kira at the end, like not forgiving her mom, but also not quite as quick to condemn. She's just kind of like, it's complicated. I'm not sure how to feel about it. I like
the fact
like
that she
nuance.
it seemed like the only way she could give some value to what her mom said was because she was her blood relative. Comes pretty close to condemning her, but you did get that sense that this is that's like her immediate gut reaction. I mean, obviously this is pretty gross to see. It's gross to realize that when you're watching Kira down there in the the holding pens or whatever, that oh yeah, her mom is off sleeping with Dukat. Like I definitely could have done without that. But I think it feels honestly a little bit it feels like a kind of a I don't like her morality in this. I don't really like it. It feels a little Victorian or whatever, like, oh, my mother was tarnished, how can she ever live with herself? And like, yeah, you got to live because of that, maybe.
That kept your belly.
Yet,
but that's why she doesn't blow her up at the end. So I don't think
right.
I disagree that she condemns her mom.
Well, it's the way she talks about it with Cisco afterwards.
But she also stopped the bomb from going off.
Right. Her actions
when
did show
when
that.
she heard the message of her dad. They brought back the same actor who played her dad in Ties of Blood and Water. When we see like the flashback where she missed her dad's death because she was off fighting the Cardassians.
Right.
But they brought that dude back. But
that's interesting. Yeah.
This is a very trivial thing to complain about, but since I'm already bitching about this episode a lot, I'll just say like the little girl who plays like little girl Kira has like blue eyes instead of brown eyes, like the novice. I mean, we have like the whole like Chris Pine has very famously blue eyes, and William Shatner has very famously hazel eyes, and it's kind of weird they're supposed to be the same. At least they don't appear on screen together at any point, though. So it's like nah, this little kid that looks nothing like you is you. It's just weird to have that on screen.
One other thing, I don't know, history is definitely something of a lost art, and the further we get from any historical event, the blurrier it gets. one thing this episode might have done was introduce the reality of the like comfort women in World War II. Like this was that term wasn't like a made up Trek term. This was a real thing, and of course it's happened in all wars throughout time.
Yeah.
But the scope of it in World War II, I actually looked it up to remind myself essentially how many women were enslaved into prostitution for it, and the numbers vary, but it said something like between 50,000 and 200,000 women, and like if you can. It's almost an unimaginable scope for what is rape, and so like if some people were able to through this episode access that history and maybe become a little bit more aware of really how bad things can get in the real world, then that is another possible good thing about the episode.
Yeah, and the actor who plays Kira Maru, she actually directed some episodes of Star Trek Picard season 2, but I can't remember which ones. But,
that's wild.
Yeah, she's a director now.
All right, shall we hit the last one?
Sure. So we're gonna close out on season 6, episode 18, Inquisition. Written by Bradley Thompson and David Weddle, directed by Worf himself, Michael Dorn. An officer from the Starfleet Department of Internal Affairs arrives on the station and accuses Dr. Bashir of being a Dominion spy, although that's not really what happens. Dave, we've talked.
I thought he was going to be I thought it was going to be true.
We've talked a lot about like Section 31 over the years. I guess you were introduced to them in Star Trek Into Darkness back in 2013, and
that's probably true. I don't know. I feel like I might have seen them referenced like in a comic or something before then, but or like had some vague awareness of it. But yeah, technically, that was probably the first real awareness I had.
Yeah, they had a big role in Star Trek Discovery. They also popped up briefly recently in Star Trek Lower Decks. It's always been kind of a controversial thing in the Star Trek fandom. Like, should Section 31 exist? Should it not? You've had some opinions on it. We've talked about over the years. What did you think now after seeing the first episode to introduce them?
Incidentally, I did not realize that this was the case, even though you had said that there was Section 31 stuff coming up. I think I didn't realize it until Bashir is told it in this. So it was like basically the end of the episode or last quarter of it.
Yeah, that scene when Sloane is like, "We're called Section 31," and Dr. Bashir is like, "I've never heard of it."
Yeah,
but you're probably like, "I've heard of it."
Yeah, that was it. And it weirded me out because I was like, was it not mentioned earlier at some point, but like not until season 6? I forgot it was such a late season concept. And of course, I don't know where they go with it. So I do think, as a concept, I'm not wild about Section 31, where they're like, oh yes, this goes back to the Starfleet's charter. I'm like, I don't like it being a 200-year-old CIA Black Ops secret.
Well, they're not like the CIA though. Like this is why I complained about how Star Trek Discovery did it. Where in Star Trek Discovery, it seemed to be like a thing like people knew it existed and they were like part of Starfleet or something. Like like Pike and Michael Burnham seemed to like know Section 30, like what it was, and Pike like knew Leyland. They had like served together in the past and stuff. I much prefer the Deep Space Nine approach, where it's like much more mysterious and clandestine and smaller, but in a way like scarier. Like you get the impression here that like, yeah, most people like in like higher ups in Starfleet and the Federation and everything have probably never even heard of this, and they've just been operating secretly for all this time. And I think that's a much cooler idea and actually fits the Star Trek ethos better than how they've been presented in some of the more recent.
It can't help but make them appear, and there's something to be said for this. It certainly fits Deep Space Nine's theme. Starfleet is somewhat naive, right? They don't realize that they're secretly being propped up by like this shadowy organization. But it's it definitely goes against the utopian impulses and that element of it that Roddenberry baked in.
I disagree with that, because Roddenberry in the original series maintained this notion of there's still going to be these dark impulses and human. We see a lot of human bad guys throughout the original series. We see like bad ship captains. Like Ron
Sure.
Tracy, for example, in the Omega
Well, I
Glory.
guess
Harry Mudd.
Roddenberry's
So
Roddenberry's philosophy changed over time and became more utopian as we got to the next gen era, and almost wildly
But
too much.
even then, we go to season 1 Next Generation, which is arguably the most pure Roddenberry vision of Star Trek at all time. That's when he had like the most creative control. There was no Robert Wise, there was no Gene Coons. It was like Roddenberry as the boss. And even there, we still had a Badmiral with Admiral Jameson, who de-aged in too short a season. So I actually think it does fit to have, there's like this place, this section, the 31st section, but there's like this group, this category where you can kind of like lump a lot of like those, I guess, bad actor humans together in this broadly utopian society. I think it actually does fit there. As the key thing for me is that the good guys have to acknowledge that Section 31 are the bad guys, which Bashir and Cisco and Kira and everyone, like at the end of the episode when he tells everyone about it, they do seem to be like, yeah, this is frightening, this is disturbing. I
they're
hate
like,
this.
let's infiltrate them.
Yeah, it's and Section 31 becomes like another problem. I haven't brought it up recently because the Dominion has been so dominant. But Deep Space Nine, I always talk about the problems don't go away. The Cardassians are a problem. The Maquis are a problem. The Klingons were a problem for a little bit. So they keep dropping all these problems on us, and now Section 31 is another problem.
So I'll say this. I am still not necessarily convinced on Section 31 as something a development I wanted to see. But it's there, it's part of Trek history, and it's not something that's like, it's not a major problem for me, and I can enjoy the stories like when I enjoy the stories. And I thought this was a good episode. I thought that in particular the actor who played Sloane did a great job. Yeah, who is that? Anybody in particular? He seemed familiar.
Well, to me, he's awesome because he played Death. He was the Grim Reaper in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which everyone makes fun of me when I say this, and people are even like, "Oh my god, that can't be true. I don't believe you." But that movie was one of the things that kind of pushed me to get into Star Trek because I loved Bill and Ted as a kid, and I was like, "Oh look, Bill and Ted watch Star Trek." Because, they're watching Arena. They're watching Kirk fight the Gorn in Bogus Journey. And I was like, oh, they like Star Trek. Maybe I'll like Star Trek. So
that's pretty wild. I definitely wouldn't have. I mean, everybody will remember Death from that movie, but I did not. But like, it's been decades since I've seen it.
And he comes back in Face the Music as Boatwreck and the live audience has reminded me. He makes a appearance in that movie as well.
He's charismatically oily in this. He's got a little bit of the sort of Columbo approach. Just one more question.
And he has a wide range because the character he plays, Sloane, exhibits a wide range. I was saying earlier how O'Brien is not a good actor. Sloane is a great actor.
Right. And he kind of does that.
Fold.
Sometimes he's like palling around with you a little bit. Sometimes he's like insinuating. There's a lot of insinuations.
Oh, I'm sorry, Doctor. You didn't get your scones and jams. I'll have someone bring that right up to you.
Yeah.
Which the psychological torture to Bashir, like they're starving him, they're denying him sleep, and we don't know it the first time we're watching this, but there's a clever thing they do, Dave. A little subtle clue as to what's going on. That after Bashir is within like this holodeck program. Of course, we don't know that it started, but they never cut to an exterior shot of the station because he's not really on the station. And I love that detail. I think that's so cool.
I fully bought into it as it was happening. I was like, oh wait, did I hear something about this? That it does turn out he's a traitor, but he's got enough of it was all sort of essentially brainwashing or programming of some sort, and so he turns against it. But yes, they were using him because all the stuff he brings up is pretty convincing. Like he mentions like about a zillion episodes where something happened, that's normally you would just say, well, that's a little far fetched, but well, that's just a Star Trek plot kind of thing. They do those contrivances sometimes, but if you were to start poking at it, you could make it sound conspiratorial, and that's exactly what he does.
And I love like Bashir's frustration with all of this. And then even like when Bashir kind of turns into like a smartass and he's like, let me think about it. Was I alone when I was in solitary? Yes, I was. But that's just, I guess just like the pissy Bashir, which, they only gave him 1 hour of sleep. They were offering him worms to eat instead of his traditional breakfast of buttered scones and jam.
Yeah.
I also love there's like this recurring joke, this dumb gag. It started in the Next Generation of O'Brien with his hurt shoulder. He's always like hurting his shoulder, kayaking or mostly, but like he would walk into sickbay on the Enterprise and Dr. Crusher would have to fix his shoulder from time to time. It's happened on Deep Space Nine several times, and I love that like that was like the one detail they got wrong, and it wasn't because Section 31 was incompetent. It's because it just happened too recently to get programmed into their program. But when Bashir is like, oh, your shoulder's not hurt, and O'Brien's just like, oh yeah, it got better, and Bashir's like, but you hurt it, playing spring ball, and O'Brien's like, yeah, so what other? And it was actually, you were kayaking, and then that's what I'm assuming also that like Sloan, is watching all of this, taking notes, so he's probably like, I'm just gonna let this go until he figures it out. Let's just test him out. Let's just see how long we can keep him here. Trying to figure this out. So
now was everything staged with the intent of possibly recruiting him, or was it like it was more of a, let's find out if he's a traitor, he's not, but let's take advantage of this possible asset. Is it that second thing?
I think it's both. I think they're killing two birds.
Well, they didn't go there just to recruit him. That seems like lot of.
I think it is. But they also wanted to make sure he wasn't really a spy.
Man, okay, so you think so. I see what you're saying.
Section 31...
They're putting themselves very publicly out there. They are commandeering the base that is at the forefront of the entire war effort. They're usurping Cisco's power and all that stuff to potentially recruit.
But none of that was
guy.
Real. That was all on the holodeck. None of that actually happened.
Was it? None of that had. Oh, you're right.
No,
okay.
from the
I couldn't remember if that part was real.
From the time that Bashir, he woke up to go on his trip to that conference on Casperia Prime that Dax was talking about in the last episode, and he was like, really, is it 700 hours already? Like that point, and then everything after that is all in the holodeck. So
that's right. That's right.
No one saw Sloan other than Bashir when he's like standing there in ops in front of everyone. That was all in the holodecks. That's not really Kira. That's not really Cisco. That's not really Worf. Right. All of that was a fabrication.
That's some good AI work that they have for their holodeck program. So, I want to compliment Section 31 in this case. So what I think we can reasonably assume happened is we saw how good the augments were at like making those projections a few episodes ago in statistical probabilities. They weren't 100%, but they were pretty good. So Section 31 caught wind of that, and they're like, holy hell, we need one of these guys. This Dr. Bashir seems like he might be our guy. He even plays James Bond on the frickin' holosuite. Let's totally recruit him. But wait, what if the Dominion were using his genetically engineered brain? He spent all that time in the prison camp there. We better test that out, too, before we, sign him up to Section 31. Right. But yeah, as an introduction to Section 31, it's a pretty excellent episode that functions as one type of thriller and then becomes something completely different by the end, which is a pretty neat thing to do. Yeah, I will be interested to hear they don't have actually a lot of time to do more Section 31 stuff. Does it recur very often between now and the end of the show? We will, since you're asking, we'll see Section 31 in multiple remaining episodes. That's fine. I'm not. That's a level of spoiler I'm not too worried about.
I do miss. It does make me nostalgic for the old days when Section 31 was so mysterious. Because I remember, I used to have like these conversations. This is also around the time that I started getting on the internet in like 1998 when it was becoming more common and we had internet in our house. and talking to or seeing what other Star Trek fans are saying about stuff, or reading the forums and like the magazines that were in print back then. But yeah, people would speculate on like, what if Section 31 is just Sloan, or what if it's just like him and like a couple other dudes? What if these guys that we see in that holodeck with them, what if they're actually holograms? They might not even be real. All these mysteries.
It was
And
that level of unknown.
yeah, I do
It
kind of
hadn't been
miss that.
canonized by Memory Alpha yet.
Right, right. When he says like we've been around for hundreds of years, and I actually find that easier to buy into Section 31 because it's like, oh, this is something that was set up so long ago, and no one with any authority has checked in on it. So now that mankind has evolved and we do have like better values and stuff, we can't stop the Section 31 stuff because the guy 200 years ago set that in motion. It's just been operating, secretly, in the shadows without any type of oversight since then. So it's almost like a relic of mankind's flaws that we've largely progressed beyond. But that relic is still and I actually think it functions very appropriately. And I would love there to be in this new era of Star Trek. I think if you're wanting to do something big, I keep talking about, one day we're going to have like the 1000th episode and do something big then. But I would love to see the defeat of Section 31, where they become kind of, they're going to be like the big end game villain for like, an era of Star Trek or something. I think they're like a worthy opponent. And it's almost like that rejection of our flawed, outdated past that we have to overcome. And I think that actually would work very well for what most people I think enjoy Star Trek for, those traditional Star Trek values.
In the TV show Alias, Jennifer Garner worked for an organization she thought was the CIA, but in the first episode you find out is like a secret shadow organization that poses as it to its members. So the whole season was her running op missions for this fake CIA organization, but secretly knowing it wasn't and trying to subvert them. And then at the end of season 1 or season 2, they overthrow them. Mm-hmm. And then there was still more to do afterwards. She like joined actual CIA or whatever. But I wonder if the Section 31 show could follow any variant of a model like that, where even within the show, it is about overthrowing them.
I would absolutely love that, and I think that actually might be somewhat likely. When they first announced that Section 31 show that still hasn't gone into production, but they keep even earlier this week, some Paramount Plus people were saying, "Oh, it's still happening. We're still going to do the show with Michelle Yeoh." But when they first announced that back in 2019, I remember, Dave, you and I were both like very skeptical about that. And then I got won over when I heard the writers who developed that first season, that we don't know if it'll ever get made, but Bowie Kim and Erica Lapolte, they said, this isn't going to be a betrayal of like the Star Trek values, and like a lot of that stuff is like on our mind as we're writing this. And they also said like all those questions that you have, like why do people not know about Section 31 in DS9, but in Discovery, some people did seem to know about them. Like they said all that stuff would be explained. So now I actually want that show because I think, oh yeah, there is potential there to do something neat. Maybe someday we'll get it. I hope that we do. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about the Section 31 usage on Deep Space Nine in the episodes to come.
Right on.
That's all I got. So that was a lot. These 9 episodes. Like I said, like 4 of these I think deserve to be in like the top 5 best Star Trek episode ever list, or at least my personal favorites. We have another big one, as you were talking about, Dave. You said you've already heard about this next one, just like you have already heard about Far Beyond the Stars. But next week we will finish Deep Space Nine Season 6 by discussing Season 6, Episode 10, In the Pale Moonlight. And then the 7 episodes after that, all the way up to the Season 6 finale, Tears of the Prophets.
Mm-hmm.
So then we'll be into the final 7th and final season. So winding down to the end of DS9.
Although I'll be sad to see it finish, I am a person who does like to. The things I like, I don't like them to perpetuate, and so I like an ending, and so I will be excited to get to the finale on that level. You hope that it ends well for me?
No, I hope you hate it, actually.
I'm pretty sure I'm going to like it. Honestly, as good as the show has been, it could even end on a mediocre note for me, or one where I'm like, oh, that was good, but not what I wanted to happen or whatever, and I'd still probably be like, this could be the best Trek ever.
Well, there's definitely been some good stuff on the current 5 2/3 of a season that we've discussed. But yeah, there's more greatness to come. This is probably my favorite batch of episodes we'll ever discuss, like I said at the top of the show. But there's still some really great stuff left in season 6 and some phenomenal stuff in season 7. I'm really looking forward to exploring with you, Dave. So we will continue the conversation next week. People can catch us live on YouTube Friday at 7 p.m. Central, or listen to us wherever you get your podcast. And until then, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek. And follow Fathery on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.